Well, good morning, Kaylee and Stella. I hope you guys are ready for our next project. I hope you had fun drawing all of our deciduous trees for practice, because that is one of the parts of things that we're going to be using to create our next project. This project is going to use a combination of our deciduous tree drawing and all the things we've been learning about linear perspective. We spent quite a few days working on making things look farther away, and we learned a couple different tricks. One of those is by making things in the background look lighter and increasingly darker as they get up close into the foreground. Another was by overlapping. So we have a bunch of trees here that are overlapping, and they're going from light, and they're smaller, and they get darker as they come close. It's such a fun project. I hope you're ready to get started. The supplies that you are going to need are your drawings that you did, just so you can remember kind of how we did it. You're also going to want your pencil. You're going to want a couple different paint brushes. I have a small, medium, and large. My large one is a flat one, and the other two are round brushes, whatever brushes you have in the house that you feel like you can control well. You're going to want a jar of water, again, our paper towel to clean our brushes off on. You're going to want a paint palette, so that could be a paper plate, it could be a lid, it could be an actual paint palette. You have the containers of paint that I sent home with you. You're going to dump those in small amounts onto either like a lid or the paper plate or into a palette. All right, so before we get started, I just want to show you a couple of examples of the project that we're working on. Some of these student examples you can see use slightly different colors, but it's all the same concepts. So we're going to paint a background color that will be our sky. We will put a horizon line in, and that's going to be the lightest gray color. And then we will do basically what appears to be like another horizon line, and that will be with a medium gray. And then in the forefront, we are going to have our darkest color for our trees, and we will add the most detail. So if we look at the painting that I worked on, you can see in the background we really aren't seeing any kind of rocks or anything on the ground, because we're saying that's so far away that we wouldn't be able to distinguish those different details. Now in the midground, we start to see some of that. We can see that the ground is a little bit bumpy. We can see that there's some sort of green grass or plants growing. And then in the foreground, that's our area up front, we have our darkest trees, and we have our background. And again, I've got some marks and lines that we use for plants, and we've got rocks on here for trees. We are going to be painting this in a series of steps that we have to let dry in between. So this project you might want to do over a couple of days. The first thing that we are going to do is paint the background color in, and you can see my horizon line is about halfway on the paper, and we will be painting that background color. You'll see that I gave you white and black containers, but then I also gave you the orange and the yellow. This is when you're going to use the orange and the yellow and a little bit of the white, and that's what we'll use to mix the sky. The other thing that you're going to need, of course, is the piece of paper that I sent home. All right, let's get started. Stella and Kaylee, we're going to do the first part of our painting. We are going to be using our orange, yellow, and white paint first to put in the background sky. We are going to need to let that dry in between, and then we will work on the next part. You're going to want your bigger brush. I have my flat one. You could use a flat or a round brush. Make sure you have some water and a paper towel to wipe your brush with. I'm gonna start with the darkest color first, and just so you know, I put a pencil line here for a horizon line on my painting. I am going to go ahead and just let some of these colors kind of blend as they go. I'm coating it in the orange. I'm adding some yellow. Add a little bit of white. Smooth it out. Make it kind of a creamy color. You can put a piece of paper underneath paper that you're painting on if you want to protect the surface of the table or the surface that you are working on. We want to up to all of the edges. And the corners of our painting. Our trees are going to be going over top this, so it's nice to have this kind of light. I'll grab just a little bit of my yellow and mix that in. You don't want to overblend it because you are going to want some to be a little bit lighter and some to be a little bit darker. All right, we're going to let that sit. You can go ahead, clean your brush really well, and we'll take a break until this is completely dry. See you soon. Okay, girls, I hope that you have your painting in front of you, that's all dry, and that you are ready for the next step. I wanted to remind you of how we learned how to draw trees yesterday and or last week, and we are going to be putting these silhouette deciduous trees on the background of our orangey yellow sky, and we are going to do this with a light gray, a medium gray, and then a dark gray. Before we paint in our first sections, we are going to draw them, and we just want to review what we have here, where we have the trunk that is thickest, and as it branches out to 2 or 3 major branches, each branch then gets smaller. So that is what we are going to be putting on the background of our paper or over top of our sky. So let's start with our pencils. And I'm looking at how much of this paper I have left, and I am going to, you can see I've kind of divided it into 3 sections, draw kind of a line across, and that's going to be for the ground, and I'm putting this, so you can see that section is going to go from here will be the ground, and then this will be the area that I'll keep gray. I think we should put in at least 2 or 3 trees, and we're going to make them go. We're going to make them go all the way up. Then we want to give them a couple of branches that will come off of them. We're not going to do too many because we're going to be putting other trees in front of and on top of these. So there's one. There's a second one. I'm going to do kind of a skinny one, kind of a young tree. And maybe one more off the side. And we'll put another branch. So we're just going to paint those in a light gray. Now I sent home white for you, and we're going to mix that with a little bit of black, and we are going to make ourselves a nice gray. I am using my round brush because it'll be easier to fill in. You don't want to add too much black, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to be filling in the lines that I drew for our tree. Now I look at that and I think that's maybe not light enough. So that might be our medium gray. I'm going to put a little bit more white on my palette. I think this is a little bit better. I'll just paint right over. And it can blend with that little bit darker gray that I mixed first. Then I'm just going to go and work on the ground a little bit and fill in the other trees with this lighter gray. How the gray looks over the orange. It's very pretty. I'm going to be working on this last one over in the corner. And then I'm going to paint this bottom part of the ground. You might want to use a bigger brush. Just a little bit of white because I had only that darker gray mix. Okay, we have our second layer. So we have our orange sky in the background and we have our first light gray. Now you probably want to cover up your paints in your palette, and we'll let our painting dry and we will cover these palettes to save our gray for later. See you soon. All right, girls, we are ready for our next step, and we are going to work with our pencils first. And again, we are going to be putting a line across our drawing, not all the way to the bottom. You can see here's the bottom. Keep moving up my paint. Here's the bottom. We're going to put a line that's in between those two with our pencil. So we will be painting with this next darker color here, and then we'll be saving this for the last part. So we want to draw in, we want to fit in maybe 2 trees. Those trees are going to overlap the trees that we already did and are completely dry. So, and that part of the ground is going to start overlapping parts of this lighter gray ground that we did before. So you can see here that I'm maybe putting in some bumpy ground. I could put in some rocks, and it doesn't matter, you know, you could put in some things that are going to look like grass if you wanted, but we can talk about that in a little bit. We want to put our trees in. We're thinking about, we only want to put 2 in because then we're going to overlap one more time. So we want to still have some of the orange come through. So I'm going to have 1 tree that's going to come up through here, and I am going to maybe make it a little bit thicker, and I'll have that branch come out over here. This is just like we did, you know, in this painting and this one that we did, where we're just splitting off the branches. So I've got this one, and I'm going to come here and we're going to do that parallel thing again. And we've got our two main branches that come off of that. Now we didn't do I kept these pretty simple. So this one I think I'm going to give a little bit more detail to, like that. And hopefully after doing the 3 trees that we did last week, you feel pretty comfortable about adding the details here for this. So I think that's probably enough. Once we have the darker paint, we can of course change our mind and add some more if we would like to do that. So I've got the 1, and I think I'm going to leave this our next for the 3rd level. And I think I will put another tree over, I'll probably put one in between here. So we'll have 2 medium ones. I'm going to do a line that goes all the way up. We can give that other line alongside of the trunk. So it's going to be a thinner tree. It'll be younger. The trees, deciduous trees, get wider as they grow and add trunk. So this one's going to be a little bit thinner. I'm going to come up and then I'm going to split off a branch here and bring a parallel one there. We'll pull this one up here. And I think maybe I will, again, give it a little more detail than our last one. You're going to want to be careful when we're painting that you don't overwork it and make the orange start mixing in, because these are tempera paints. Once they get wet again, they can you can move them again. So we don't want that to happen. So we've got those 2 trees. I might do just one more over off to the side. We've got a wide enough space. I kind of like that. And you can take time just doing the pencil part if you want to make sure you have it so you like it. At the bottom now, if you want to put in some rocks that overlap, obviously this small one we wouldn't see because we'll just be painting the silhouette, which is just the outline, and not putting designs on the inside. I'm going to put a couple. This will be kind of a rocky surface. And maybe I will put in another thing of grass. We'll do most of that with the paint. So I have added 1 drop of black to the gray that we already used. Now this was already a little bit darker. Remember how we added white? So I've added a little bit more black, and I'm just going to mix it. We want it to be darker than this. So whenever we add black to a color, we call it a shade. It's a shade of that color. When we add white to a color, then it's a tint. And I always remember that because white has an I in it and the word tint has an I in it. And so it's a tint of the color. And if you add black to it, then you get a shade, and the word shade has an A, and black has an A. So that's kind of a silly way to remember, but that's how I remember the difference between shade and tint and what that means. Now you can see I pulled over a little bit more of this gray, and the reason why I did that was to make sure that I have enough paint in this shade, okay, this medium gray shade. So we've got, I think that's going to be enough. I'm going to put it on here. Your paint will always dry darker. So we just want it to be darker than the gray that we used last time. I can see with some of these thinner branches, I might also need my thinner round brush. I will pull that out and use that if indeed I need a little bit more to add a little more detail. So I'm going to go ahead and start putting in the base of the trunk, and you can see I've got some of those rocks that I had. I'm outlining those. You want to be careful and not do this bottom part until you get most of the top because you don't want your sleeve to get in it. But this just lets us see what that's going to look like. It will actually be a little bit darker once it dries. And that's okay because we're just going to work with black for the last layer. So this will be lighter than black. And so I'm just going over. If you need to add water to your paint and thin it down so that you can paint with it better, just mix that in really well with the paint that you're working with and go ahead and do that. If it's coming across dry and you're getting bumps that don't get the paint on it, then that means you just need to add a little bit more water to it. You also can put paper underneath your painting to protect your the surface that you're painting under if you need to. So that's the first tree. I'm going to go over here. Now I am just still using my my bigger round brush. So I think I'll be okay. I might end up using the smaller one to put some grasses in. I'm going to add a little more water. And we're going to go down and get the trunk of this one. And you can already see how this looks lighter than this because this is dry and it's darker. So you can see how the one looks, but this will should dry as dark as the other one. So when it's no longer wet. So we'll pull that off to the edge. So we have that second layer done on this side. I'm going to move my paintbrush. We're going to keep picking up the paint, this gray shade, and now I'm going to put in the paint for the biggest, oldest tree in this layer. If you decide you don't like where you drew your pencils, you can erase it. Again, you can see how it's lighter when it's wet, but it will dry darker. And we're going just right over top the branches of that lighter gray. And I can see I'm getting close to the end of my paint, so I'm going to add some more water to it. That will thin it out, but it also makes it go a little farther. And helps to make it, you can see that area that was a little, not quite enough paint. I'm feeling pretty good about those trees, and I am going to now go in and paint in the rest of the ground. Now this brush is a little small. It will take longer, so I'm going to wash that brush and just go ahead and use that flat brush that I used before that can hold a little bit more paint. Kind of using up all my paint here. I'm going to go in with that thin brush that I pulled. I'm cleaning off my big brush, and I'm going to take this thin brush and I'm going to just put in a little bit of grass. Now you can see that's quite a bit lighter, and that is not going to dry as light as this. So I have to take a little bit of my black. So you can scoop up a little bit of your black from your container and add it if you need. The problem is, is trying to keep it so that it matches what we already mixed. That's why it's really better to to mix it all at once. But we did our best. I did my best, and I just didn't do quite enough. So I'm going to make my shade again and add a little bit of black to it, and we'll see if we can, what it looks like. Okay, so that's a little too dark because it's going to dry darker. This is where, like I said, it gets complicated. So if you run out of paint, you can just be done and let that layer dry. I'm going to just see if I can get it with my leftover. That's a little better. I'll just quick smear that out. And there we have our second layer of grays. So we have the tint in the background that we mostly used white with, and then we've been adding black. So we've been making darker shades of this gray. Our final one that we are going to do will be black trees, and then those will be in the foreground. So we will have the foreground, the midground, and the background. All of these things that we've been talking about over the past couple weeks. So I hope you're having fun. This needs to completely dry, and then we will come back and do our final layer. Now with this gray paint, because we're going to be using black straight, you don't need to keep this. So go ahead and either you can throw away your paper plate if that's what you used, or you can clean out the plastic, if you used a plastic lid or whatever container you used for mixing your paints. You can go clean that out if you can reuse it. We'll see you soon. Okay, Kaylee and Stella, we are ready to do our last layer, our foreground layer of our trees. And we are going to be using our black. So you want to take that little container that I gave you of the black, and instead of just scooping a little out, you can just use it directly out of that. We're going to start like we have with all of our other ones, and we're going to use our pencil first to draw in our tree. So here we have, I have a perfect spot for a nice big tree, and here is where I'm going to put our other one. It will slightly overlap with the other trees that we already have in there. And we're just going to go in and do what we've been doing, where we make a thicker trunk and we have it kind of run parallel across from each other, and then it can break off into some of these other branches that we've talked about and you practiced last week. And again, if you don't like how you drew it in, you can always change it a little bit as you paint. Now, I just really feel like I want another branch coming up on my big tree, and I'm going to have it cross over in a couple of spots. The key to this last layer is that we want to make it really kind of interesting, and these are the trees that are going to really stand out the most. So your branches don't have to be perfectly straight, like in some of those examples I showed you. Some of them were kind of crooked and had, you know, more of an organic squiggly, kind of like this, where it's not smooth or completely smooth. You can see though, as I'm drawing in this big tree, I've got all sorts of branches and they're crossing over, and it can get a little bit confusing. So just take your time. Again, once you paint it in, it's going to be really easy to see and it won't be confusing. But when you're just drawing it in, it can feel that way a little bit. So I don't want you to feel frustrated. I want you to feel like, oh, this is a lot of fun, and all that practice I did last week, I'm now using, and I'm making a cool tree. We can always add more branches as we paint. I'll do one more over here. That's going to be my biggest tree that's going to stand out the most. And we'll do one here. It'll be a younger tree because I'll make the trunk smaller, and we'll have it cross over. And again, when you're splitting off the branches, usually you want them to split off into 2 or 3 major branches, and then from there it can get smaller. My pencil is getting worn down, so I either need to get a new one or I'm probably gonna have to go sharpen it. But at least you can really see where I'm going. We can do the same thing on the bottom when we paint in the black and put in some hills if we need, or some little rocks and grass. So we can decide that as we go. I've got that really thin brush, I've got my bigger round one, and I still have my flat one. You can choose to use whichever paintbrushes you want. I think I'm going to use my larger round brush. And again, I'm going to start from the top more and then come down so my arms don't smear into the painting that I just do. So I added a little bit of, I got my brush wet and I add a little water to it. It's probably, your paint is probably, it might be a little too thick just because it's been in that container for a while and possibly drying out just a little bit. So go ahead. If it helps and it's easier to pour your paint out onto a paper plate for a palette, you can go ahead and do that. What's really fun is seeing how once I painted in with the black that is darker than our dark gray and our light gray, it just really pops and stands out. And if there are parts that you don't like, that you put in with pencil, you can always go back and erase them after your paint is dry. You also want to remember that as your branches get farther away from the trunk, they should get thinner. And that's where I might have to go in and use my thinner brush. Anytime your paint stops moving well and it's too dry and it's leaving marks, then go ahead and add a little bit of water. As you're painting, if you see a spot where you're like, oh, I think I want to put another branch in, but I didn't draw it, go ahead. Deciduous trees are fun because they're all so different. Every one you draw and look at will look a little different. So you can see how mine spreads out. It's really going to stand out. Once I feel like I've got all the branches in that I want for my 2 black trees, I might go in with my thinner brush a little later on. I'm going to go ahead and paint in the rest of the foreground. First, I will do it nice and solid. And then I'll probably add some rocks and maybe some grass like we did. Brush. We're going to let these paintings completely dry, but that is basically it. We have our fun landscape that uses tints and shades, and we show a sense of depth by overlapping and by making things lighter as they're in the background, and we learned how to make a lighter gray, a medium gray, and then to use our black. Don't forget to sign your name at the very bottom. You can see on my painting that I didn't paint all the way to the edge, so I could trim that off if I wanted to make it feel like a finished piece. Girls, I hope you had so much fun working on this painting with me. I can't wait to see what you do, and I look forward to seeing those posted on Seesaw. Have a great week.